Millionaire disguised himself at his own restaurant and froze when the waitress said 3 words. It was a chilly Friday evening in the heart of the city, the kind of evening where the cold bit through jackets and made people hurry toward the warmth of restaurants and shops with glowing windows. Daniel Hart stood outside one of his own establishments, Hart & Co., staring at the elegant gold lettering on the door and feeling something he hadn't felt in years about his business: dread. At 32, Daniel had built a restaurant empire from nothing. He'd started with a single small bistro 8 years ago, working 16-hour days as chef, server, manager, and janitor, all rolled into one. Now he owned 12 upscale restaurants across 3 cities, each one known for exceptional food and, supposedly, exceptional service. But lately, the complaints had been rolling in. Not about the food his chefs were still producing masterpieces. About the service, cold staff, rude attitudes, customers feeling rushed or ignored, long waits without explanation. The kind of treatment that went against everything Daniel had built his reputation on. He'd read the reviews obsessively over the past week. Food was amazing, but the hostess made us feel like we were bothering her. Server rolled his eyes when we asked questions about the menu. Waited 20 minutes for water while staff chatted behind the counter. Beautiful restaurant, terrible service. Each review felt like a personal betrayal. Daniel had trained his original staff himself, emphasizing that hospitality mattered as much as the food, that every guest deserved to feel welcomed and valued. That service wasn't just a transaction but an experience. Somewhere along the way, as the business grew and he spent more time in corporate offices than actual restaurants, that culture had eroded. His managers assured him they were handling it. His regional director insisted the complaints were outliers, that most customers were perfectly satisfied. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. He'd built Hart & Co. on a foundation of exceptional hospitality, and that foundation was crumbling. He remembered his own early days in the restaurant industry, working as a server at a family diner when he was 16. The owner, Mr. Chen, had taught him a philosophy that shaped everything Daniel later built. "Danny," Mr. Chen had said, "you'll serve rich people and poor people, kind people and rude people. But you treat them all the same, with respect, with care, because everyone who walks through that door deserves to feel like they matter." Contendia Phase 5 at French. That lesson had stayed with Daniel through culinary school, through his years working in various kitchens, through the terrifying leap of opening his own restaurant with borrowed money and too much hope. He'd built Hart & Co. to be the kind of place where Mr. Chen's philosophy wasn't just spoken but lived every single day. But somewhere between Restaurant 1 and Restaurant 12, between small business owner and CEO, between hands-on management and corporate oversight, that philosophy had gotten lost. So tonight, instead of sending corporate mystery shoppers or scheduling formal inspections that staff would prepare for, Daniel had decided to see the truth for himself. He'd left his tailored suits and expensive watch at home. Instead, he wore faded jeans that had seen better days, an old hoodie with a coffee stain on the sleeve, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. With 2 days of stubble and tired eyes from a week of poor sleep, worrying about his business, he looked nothing like the polished CEO whose photo appeared in business magazines and on the Hart & Co. corporate website. He looked like what he'd been 8 years ago, a regular guy trying to make ends meet, hoping for a decent meal and good service. Before we continue with this story about kindness in unexpected places, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. The stories we share here remind us that how we treat people when nobody's watching reveals our true character. Now let's see what Daniel discovers when he walks into his own restaurant as just another customer. Daniel pushed through the heavy oak door into Hart & Co., immediately hit by the warmth and the smell of seared steak and fresh bread. The interior was exactly as he'd designed it 3 years ago, when this location opened elegant but inviting, with warm lighting that made everyone look good, exposed brick walls that added character, and tables arranged to feel intimate rather than crowded. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, the pianist's fingers dancing over keys with practiced ease. The bar along the left wall glowed with backlit bottles of premium liquor. Fresh flowers adorned every table. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked exactly like the vision Daniel had poured his heart and considerable resources into creating. But the hostess stand was empty. Daniel stood there for a full 2 minutes, watching staff move through the dining room with trays of food and bottles of wine, none of them acknowledging his presence. He could see the hostess, a young woman he recognized from staff photos but had never met in person, chatting with another employee near the bar. She glanced his direction once, made brief eye contact, then continued her conversation like he wasn't standing there waiting. Daniel felt the first flicker of anger, quickly suppressed. He was here to observe, not to react. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably closer to 3 minutes, the hostess sauntered over to her stand, not making eye contact as she grabbed menus. "Just you?" she asked. Her tone suggesting a single diner was an inconvenience rather than a customer. "Yes, just me," Daniel said politely, the way he imagined most customers would respond. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, I don't. Is that okay?" The hostess, her name tag read Brittany, sighed audibly, scanning the reservation book like she was searching for any reason to turn him away. Daniel could see from his vantage point that the restaurant was maybe 60% full. There were plenty of available tables. "I guess we can squeeze you in," Brittany finally said, making it sound like she was doing him a personal favor. "Follow me." She led him to the smallest table in the restaurant, a two-top tucked in a corner near the kitchen doors where servers rushed past, constantly carrying heavy trays. The table wobbled when Daniel put his hands on it, one leg clearly shorter than the others. The lighting here was harsh compared to the rest of the restaurant, fluorescent spillover from the kitchen rather than the warm ambient lighting everywhere else. This was the table restaurant seated people they didn't want around long, the table for customers they didn't value. Brittany dropped the menu on the table without a word, didn't offer any information about specials or drink options, and walked away before Daniel could ask any questions. He caught her checking her phone as she returned to the hostess stand. Daniel sat, adjusting the table on its uneven legs, and opened the menu he'd personally approved 6 months ago. He knew every dish listed, had tasted every special, had worked with the chef to craft a menu that balanced creativity with accessibility. But looking at it now as a customer rather than an owner, he noticed things he'd missed before. No descriptions of ingredients or preparation methods, no indication of what items were vegetarian or gluten-free, no prices listed for several premium dishes, that pretentious practice that meant if you have to ask, you can't afford it. He'd have to address that. Around him, other diners laughed and talked, waited on by servers who moved with practiced efficiency. He watched a server, a young man with slicked back hair and an easy smile, joke with a table of 4 while refilling their wine glasses. Another server, a woman with her hair in a tight bun, efficiently managed a party of 8, coordinating dish timing and ensuring everyone's needs were met. But his table remained empty of service. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Daniel watched as a server, Marcus, according to his name tag, walked past his table 4 times without acknowledging him. Marcus had dark curly hair and moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd been doing this job long enough to be good at it. But each time he passed Daniel's table, his eyes slid away, refusing to make contact. When Daniel finally raised his hand politely on Marcus's 5th pass, the server's mouth tightened in visible annoyance. His eye roll was quick but unmistakable. "Yeah?" Marcus asked, approaching with obvious reluctance, his pen poised over his order pad like he was expecting Daniel to waste his time. "Could I get some water, please? And maybe a look at the wine list?" "Water's self-service," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely toward a corner station Daniel couldn't see from his seat. "And wine list is in the back of the menu. I'll be back to take your order." He turned and walked away before Daniel could respond. Daniel flipped to the back of the menu and found the wine list extensive and expensive, but at least comprehensive. He decided on a mid-range red that would pair well with most of the entrees he was considering. But Marcus wasn't back. Daniel sat there for another 15 minutes, watching Marcus laugh with co-workers at the service station, check his phone multiple times, refill water glasses for other tables, deliver bread baskets to tables that had been seated after Daniel, everything except return to take his order. This was worse than Daniel had imagined from reading reviews. This wasn't just mediocre service or staff having an off night. This was active, deliberate neglect. He felt what his customers must feel: invisible, unimportant, devalued. Like his business didn't matter because he didn't look wealthy enough or important enough to warrant basic courtesy. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned this restaurant, employed everyone here, signed the checks that paid their salaries, and he was being treated like a nuisance. Daniel wondered how many actual customers had sat in this exact spot, feeling exactly this way, before deciding never to return. How many had left negative reviews that he'd read and dismissed as exaggerations or isolated incidents? How much business had he lost because his staff had forgotten the fundamental principle that every customer deserves respect? He pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages but actually making notes about everything he was observing. Brittany at the hostess stand was still on her phone. Marcus was flirting with another server near the bar. A busboy was clearing a table but had missed several dirty plates, leaving the table looking messy even after his attention. Two servers were engaged in what looked like a heated conversation near the kitchen doors, their body language angry and defensive. None of them seemed aware or concerned that they were in full view of customers. None of them seemed to care that their behavior reflected poorly on the restaurant. Daniel was about to get up and leave, to walk out and immediately fire every person he'd observed providing terrible service, when a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "I'm so sorry for the delay, sir. You've been waiting for a while, haven't you?" Daniel looked up and found himself meeting warm brown eyes full of genuine concern. The woman standing beside his table was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing the same server uniform as Marcus: black pants, white button-down shirt, black apron, but carrying herself completely differently. Her posture was attentive without being obsequious. Her smile reached her eyes and seemed completely genuine. Her name tag read Ella. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from long shifts and too many responsibilities, but her smile was warm and her attention entirely focused on him. "I have been waiting," Daniel admitted, surprised by how much relief he felt at finally being acknowledged. "I was starting to think I was invisible." "You're not invisible," Ella said firmly, already refilling his water glass from a pitcher she'd brought without being asked. "And I apologize for my colleague's behavior. That's not how we should treat anyone, ever." The sincerity in her voice was palpable. This wasn't a scripted apology or damage control. This was genuine regret that a customer had been neglected on her watch. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu, or would you like me to tell you about our specials tonight?" "Actually, I'd love to hear about the specials," Daniel said, curious to see how much Ella actually knew about the food. Many servers memorized descriptions without understanding what they meant. Ella launched into descriptions of the evening's specials with genuine enthusiasm, explaining not just what was in each dish, but how it was prepared, why the chef had chosen particular ingredient combinations, and what made each special unique. She spoke about food, the way Daniel spoke about it, with passion and knowledge and respect for the craft of cooking. "The ribeye special is absolutely phenomenal tonight," she said. "Chef Marcus, not to be confused with Marcus the server, dry ages the beef for 28 days. It gets this incredible nutty, almost buttery flavor. He serves it with roasted garlic and thyme butter and these amazing truffle parmesan fries. It's not on the written menu, but I promise you, it's worth trying. The sea bass is also beautiful. Chef does it with a citrus beurre blanc that's light enough not to overpower the fish, but adds this wonderful brightness. It comes with roasted asparagus and fingerling potatoes. And if you're vegetarian, we have a butternut squash risotto that I honestly dream about. It's creamy and savory with just a hint of sweetness from the squash, topped with crispy sage and toasted pumpkin seeds." She made recommendations based on what Daniel said he liked, suggested wine pairings that made sense, and answered every question patiently and knowledgeably. When Daniel mentioned he'd been looking at the mid-range red wine, Ella's face lit up. "The Côtes du Rhône? Excellent choice. That would pair beautifully with either the ribeye or the lamb chops. It's got enough body to stand up to red meat, but isn't so tannic that it overwhelms the flavor." Daniel ordered the ribeye special and the wine Ella had endorsed. She smiled warmly, writing his order with neat, precise handwriting. "Excellent choice. Chef Marcus does an amazing job with that dish. It'll be about 15 to 20 minutes. Can I bring you anything while you wait? Bread? Appetizer?" "The bread would be great, thank you." "Absolutely. I'll be right back with that and your wine." She started to leave, then paused and reached into her apron pocket. "And sir?" She pulled out a small bowl of soup, steam still rising from its surface. "You look like you've had a long day. This is minestrone we make fresh daily. It's on the house. Consider it an apology for the wait and the poor service you experienced before I got to your table." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. This simple act, bringing him soup without being asked, acknowledging his wait, treating him with basic human kindness, was exactly what he'd envisioned when he created Heart & Co. This was the hospitality he'd tried to instill in every employee. This was what Mr. Chen had taught him all those years ago about treating people like they mattered. When he thanked her, genuinely moved by the gesture, Ella simply smiled and said 3 words that would echo in Daniel's mind for days to come. "Everyone deserves kindness. Everyone deserves kindness." Those 3 words, so simple, so profound, so exactly right. Everyone deserves kindness, not just wealthy customers or VIPs, or people who looked important, or guests who would leave big tips. Everyone. That philosophy was supposed to be the foundation of Heart & Co., written into training materials and employee handbooks, and the mission statement displayed in every location. But somewhere it had been forgotten by most of his staff, replaced by cynicism and indifference and the kind of jaded attitude that comes from viewing service work as beneath you rather than as a calling. Except for Ella. She remembered, or maybe she'd never forgotten. Maybe she was one of those rare people who understood instinctively that kindness cost nothing but meant everything. As Daniel ate, the minestrone was excellent, rich with vegetables and herbs, and just the right amount of salt. He found himself watching Ella work. Really watching. The way he used to observe staff when he was building his first restaurant and learning what separated good servers from great ones. She was extraordinary, not because she was exceptionally fast, though she moved with efficient purpose. Not because she had perfect technical skills, though she was clearly competent at the mechanics of serving, but because of how she treated people. Every single person. An elderly couple at table 6 was having trouble reading the menu in the restaurant's deliberately dim mood lighting. Instead of just verbally reading items to them or suggesting they use their phone flashlights, Ella disappeared for a moment and returned with a small table lamp from the hostess stand. She placed it on their table, adjusted it so the light fell on their menus without being harsh, and then patiently helped them sound out unfamiliar words and explain dishes in terms they could understand. The coq au vin is fancy French for chicken cooked in red wine with mushrooms and onions, Daniel heard her explain. It's comfort food, really. Warming and rich, kind of like if chicken stew went to Paris and came back fancier. The elderly couple laughed, and Daniel saw the woman pat Ella's hand affectionately. At table 12, a young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, was getting increasingly fussy, on the verge of a full meltdown that would disturb other diners and embarrass the already stressed parents. Instead of shooting them annoyed looks like other staff were doing, instead of suggesting they take the child outside, Ella stopped by their table during a quiet moment in her service. She knelt down to the child's level and presented him with crayons and a coloring page. "We keep these for our youngest guests," she said cheerfully. "This one has a dragon on it. Do you like dragons?" The child nodded solemnly, his impending meltdown forgotten in the face of this new activity. "Me too," Ella said conspiratorially. "Dragons are the coolest. Would you color a picture for me? I'll come back and see your masterpiece in a little bit." The child nodded again, already absorbed in choosing which crayon to start with. The parents looked at Ella with such profound gratitude that Daniel felt his throat tighten. They'd probably been dreading this dinner, knowing their child was tired and overstimulated, but needing to eat and having nowhere to leave him. Ella had transformed their stressful evening into something manageable with one simple, kind gesture. When another server, a young man named Jason, mentioned he needed to leave early for a family emergency. His grandmother had fallen and been taken to the hospital. Several staff members complained loudly enough that nearby tables could hear. "You can't just leave in the middle of service," one server hissed. "We're already short-staffed," another complained. But Ella simply touched Jason's arm gently and said, "Go. Family is important. Your grandmother needs you more than we do right now. I'll cover your last 2 tables. Don't worry about it." She added 4 tables to her already full section without complaint, without asking for additional compensation, without making Jason feel guilty for having a family emergency. She just did what needed to be done because it was the right thing to do. Daniel also noticed what Ella did during her brief moments of downtime between taking orders and delivering food. Instead of checking her phone or chatting with co-workers like Marcus and the others, she refilled water glasses proactively before customers had to ask. She cleared plates promptly so tables didn't sit looking at dirty dishes. She wiped down the coffee station that other staff had left messy. She straightened menus at the hostess stand. She kept an eye on every table in her expanded section, somehow managing to anticipate needs before guests even realized they had them. She was what Daniel called a natural hospitality person, someone who found satisfaction not in the tips or praise, but in the actual act of serving, of making people's experiences better, of creating moments of joy and comfort through food and attention. These people were rare in the industry. Most servers were competent but transactional, viewing the job as a means to an end rather than as something meaningful in itself. But Ella was different. She was the embodiment of everything Daniel had wanted Hart & Co. to represent. She was the reason he'd gotten into this business in the first place, not for profit, though that certainly mattered for sustaining operations, but because he believed deeply that food and hospitality could create moments of genuine connection and joy in people's lives. That a good meal with good service could be the highlight of someone's week. That restaurants could be more than just places to eat, but spaces where people felt valued and cared for and human. By the time Daniel finished his meal, the ribeye was perfectly cooked, medium rare with a beautiful crust. The truffle fries were crispy and addictive, and the wine paired beautifully with everything. He'd made several decisions that would change the trajectory of his company and Ella's life. He asked for his check, and when Ella brought it over in the leather folder they used, he pulled out his wallet. Inside were several $1,000s in cash, more than anyone typically carried. But Daniel had stopped at an ATM specifically for this purpose. He added a $5,000 tip to his bill. $5,000, more than Ella probably made in 3 months of serving. He paid in cash, leaving the bills folded carefully under his plate where she'd find them after he left. He didn't want to be there when she discovered it. Didn't want her to feel obligated to thank him or to make a scene. This was a thank you, pure and simple, for reminding him what mattered, for demonstrating that his original vision for Hart & Co. was still possible, for treating him with dignity and kindness when he looked like someone easily dismissed. Ella didn't discover the tip until after Daniel had left, after she'd thanked him for dining at Hart & Co. and wished him a wonderful evening, after he'd walked out into the cold night feeling both hopeful and angry about what he'd witnessed. She would later tell him that she'd stared at the money for a full minute, convinced it was a mistake or a prank, that she'd counted the bills 3 times, then run outside to see if she could find the customer who'd left such an impossibly generous tip, convinced he must have grabbed the wrong bills from his wallet. But Daniel was already gone, sitting in his car around the corner with his phone out, making calls that would change everything. Part 2 of 3. Millionaire disguised himself at his own restaurant and froze when the waitress said 3 words. Daniel sat in his car, engine running for warmth, phone pressed to his ear as he made the first of several calls that would transform Hart & Co. His regional director answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Daniel, it's almost 10 on a Friday night. Is everything okay?" "No, Amanda, everything is not okay," Daniel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I need you to schedule an emergency staff meeting for Hart & Co. for Sunday morning, 7 a.m. Entire staff, every single person who works there, no exceptions." "Sir, that's going to be difficult. Sunday is our busiest prep day, and—" "I don't care," Daniel interrupted. "Anyone who can't attend or refuses to attend is terminated immediately. Make that clear." There was silence on the other end. Amanda had worked with Daniel for 5 years and knew him well enough to recognize when he was serious. What happened? I went undercover at Hart & Co. tonight. Walked in dressed like an ordinary customer. What I experienced was completely unacceptable. Daniel launched into a detailed account of everything he'd witnessed. The hostess who'd ignored him for 3 minutes. The terrible table placement. The server who'd actively avoided serving him. The 25-minute wait before anyone even took his order. But, he continued, his voice softening slightly, I also witnessed something extraordinary. One server who understood what hospitality actually means. Someone who treated me with genuine kindness and went above and beyond without expecting anything in return. Who? Her name is Ella. I don't have a last name yet, but I will by Monday. Amanda, I want a promotion package prepared. Floor manager position with a significant salary increase. Full benefits. Everything. You're promoting a server to floor manager. I'm promoting someone who embodies everything Hart & Co. is supposed to represent. Someone who still treats every customer with dignity and kindness. Someone who hasn't forgotten why we're in this business. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Okay, I'll have the package ready. And Daniel, I'm sorry this happened. I thought the training programs we'd implemented were working. They're clearly not. We'll address that Sunday. Schedule the meeting, Amanda. I'll see you there. His next call was to his head of HR, Margaret Chen. Margaret was Mr. Chen's daughter and had grown up in her father's diner, learning the same lessons about hospitality that had shaped Daniel's career. She understood what he was trying to build because she'd seen her father build something similar. Margaret, I need your help implementing some major changes to our training and evaluation systems. He explained what had happened, and Margaret listened without interrupting. I've been saying for 2 years that our training programs aren't working, she said when he finished. We're teaching technical skills but not attitude. We're focusing on efficiency over empathy, and we're promoting people based on seniority rather than character. That changes now, Daniel said firmly. I want you to completely overhaul our training curriculum. I want empathy and kindness taught as rigorously as menu knowledge and table management. I want service observations to count as heavily as sales numbers in performance reviews. I want a culture where treating customers poorly has immediate consequences. I can do that, Margaret said. But Daniel, it's going to be expensive. More training hours, more staff oversight, probably some terminations and new hires. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared to spend whatever it takes to build the company I actually wanted to create, Daniel said. The company we lost somewhere along the way. This isn't negotiable, Margaret. We either fix this or we don't deserve to succeed. His final call was to Ella. He'd gotten her number from the employee database he kept on his phone. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice hesitant and confused. Hello? Ella? This is Daniel Hart. I'm the owner of Hart & Co. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Silence. Then a small, shaky voice. The owner? As in, the actual owner of the restaurant chain? Yes, I was your customer tonight. The man in the hoodie who you brought soup to and treated with kindness when everyone else was treating me like I was invisible. Oh my God, Ella whispered. That was you? The $5,000. I thought it was a mistake. I ran outside looking for you. I was going to return it. I still have it. I didn't spend any of it because I was sure you'd made an error. It wasn't an error, Daniel interrupted gently. That tip was completely intentional. Consider it a thank you for reminding me what actually matters in this business. But sir, I was just doing my job. I don't deserve $5,000. Ella, can you be at Hart & Co. on Sunday morning at 7? There's going to be an emergency staff meeting. I'd like you to be there. That's 7, Dean. Of course. Yes. Absolutely. Should I? Am I in trouble? Quite the opposite. Just please be there. And Ella, don't worry about the money. It's yours. You earned it through kindness and excellent service. That's worth far more than $5,000 to me. After the call ended, Daniel sat in his car for a long time, thinking about the evening and what came next. He'd built Hart & Co. with such clear vision 8 years ago. Create spaces where people felt welcomed and valued, where food was excellent but service was what made experiences memorable, where every customer, regardless of their appearance or apparent wealth, was treated with genuine hospitality. Somewhere in the expansion from one restaurant to 12, from small business to corporate entity, that vision had gotten lost. He delegated too much, trusted too many managers who talked about hospitality but didn't embody it, focused too heavily on profit margins and market share, and not enough on the human element that made restaurants meaningful. But Ella had shown him it wasn't too late. If one person could maintain that philosophy despite being surrounded by cynicism and poor examples, then it could be taught and reinforced throughout the organization. It would take work. It would take commitment. It would probably mean losing some employees who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the culture shift. But it was necessary. Sunday morning arrived grey and cold. Daniel stood in the Heart & Co. dining room at 6:45, watching staff members arrive through the windows. They looked nervous, which was appropriate. Emergency meetings were rarely good news in the restaurant industry. Most had clearly dragged themselves out of bed, showing up in casual clothes with coffee cups clutched like lifelines. Some were visibly hungover from Saturday night partying. Others looked exhausted from working double shifts all week. Ella arrived at 6:55, exactly 5 minutes early. She wore simple black pants and a neat sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked anxious, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to figure out what was happening. When she saw Daniel standing at the front in his tailored suit, recognition crossed her face immediately. Her eyes went wide, and her face flushed. She probably felt embarrassed about how she'd treated the owner without knowing who he was. But Daniel smiled at her reassuringly. She had nothing to be embarrassed about. Inside, Amanda had arranged the dining room exactly as Daniel requested. Chairs in rows facing a small podium, everyone seated where he could see them. Staff filed in, whispering nervously, trying to figure out what was happening. Brittany, the hostess, sat in the back row, still checking her phone. Marcus sat in the middle, arms crossed defensively. Jason, the server Ella had covered for, sat near the front, looking worried. Various other servers, bussers, bartenders, and kitchen staff filled in the remaining seats. About 30 people total, all employed by this one location. All about to learn that their owner had very specific expectations they weren't meeting. At exactly 7 a.m., Daniel stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is early and unexpected on a Sunday, so I'll get straight to the point." He paused, making eye contact with various staff members. "On Friday evening, I came to this restaurant disguised as an ordinary customer. I wore old clothes, didn't announce myself, and wanted to see without preparation or warning how we actually treat our guests." Whispers erupted immediately, staff members exchanging glances, some looking nervous, others confused. What I experienced was deeply disappointing and completely unacceptable. Daniel's voice remained calm, but steel threaded through every word. I stood at the hostess stand for 3 minutes before being acknowledged. He looked directly at Brittany, who shrank in her seat. When finally greeted, the tone suggested I was an inconvenience rather than a customer. I was seated at the worst table in the restaurant with no explanation or apology. I waited 15 minutes before any server approached me. His eyes found Marcus, who was staring at his lap. When a server finally came to my table, it was clear through body language and tone that I was being tolerated rather than served. My request for water was met with irritation. My questions about the menu received minimal response. I was then ignored for another 15 minutes. The room was completely silent now. No whispers, no movement. Just the weight of Daniel's words settling over staff who were beginning to realize the magnitude of their failure. "This restaurant was built on specific principles," Daniel continued. "Every guest deserves excellent service, not because of how much money they might spend, not because of how important they appear to be, not because we're hoping for a good tip, but because they're human beings who chose to dine with us, and that choice deserves respect and appreciation." Somewhere, we lost those principles. We started viewing customers as transactions, as interruptions to our conversations and phone time, as burdens rather than blessings. as people to tolerate rather than people to serve. He let that sink in for a moment. This is a hospitality business. The food we serve is important, but without genuine hospitality, we're just selling calories. Anyone can do that. What makes Heart & Co. special? What's supposed to make us special is that we make people feel welcomed and valued. We create experiences, not just meals. Daniel's voice softened slightly. However, I also witnessed something on Friday night that gave me hope. I saw one person on this staff who still understands what hospitality actually means. Someone who treated me with kindness, warmth, and genuine care, despite having no idea who I was or whether I could benefit her in any way. Someone who apologized for colleagues' behavior, who went above and beyond without expecting anything in return, who covered for a co-worker's emergency without complaint, who helped an elderly couple and calmed a fussy child and made every single guest she served feel like they mattered. He turned to look directly at Ella, who was sitting in the third row looking like she might be sick. "Ella, could you please stand up?" She stood on shaky legs, her face pale. She looked terrified, like she expected public humiliation despite Daniel's reassuring words. "Ella, when you approached my table on Friday night, after I'd been ignored and dismissed and made to feel invisible, you said something I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Do you remember what you said?" She shook her head, too nervous to speak. "You said, 'Everyone deserves kindness.' 3 words that perfectly encapsulate everything this company is supposed to represent. And then you demonstrated that philosophy through every action you took that evening. You brought me soup without being asked. You helped elderly customers read the menu. You entertained a fussy child. You covered for Jason's family emergency. You treated every single guest with warmth and respect." Daniel smiled at her. "You reminded me why I built this business. Not for profit, though that matters for sustainability, but for people. To create spaces where people feel welcomed and valued, where food and service combine to create meaningful experiences. You're living proof that those values still matter and still work." He addressed the room again. "Effective immediately, Ella is promoted to floor manager of this location." Gasps echoed through the room. Ella looked like she might faint. "She'll be working with our regional director and head of HR to rebuild the service culture here, to train all of you on what genuine hospitality looks like, to ensure that every customer who walks through our doors receives the treatment Ella provided me on Friday. And anyone who doesn't want to be part of that transformation can leave now. No judgment, no hard feelings. This is what Heart & Co. is going to be moving forward. If that doesn't align with your values, this isn't the right workplace for you." No one moved. Some looked resentful, others ashamed, a few genuinely interested in change, but no one left. "Good," Daniel said, "because here's what's going to change, effective immediately. First, we're implementing a completely new training program. Not just technical skills like table management and menu knowledge, but attitude, empathy, how to treat people with kindness even when you're tired or stressed or having a bad day. This will be mandatory for all staff, from servers to management. Second, we're changing our performance review system. Service observations by mystery shoppers and customer feedback will count as heavily as sales numbers. Being efficient but rude will no longer be rewarded. Being slower but genuinely kind will be valued. Third, I'll be making unannounced visits to all 12 Heart & Co. locations over the next few months. I'll come disguised as an ordinary customer, and I'll be evaluating not just technical competence but attitude, warmth, and genuine hospitality. Fourth, poor service will have immediate consequences. 1 warning, then termination. I'm not interested in excuses or justifications. If you can't treat customers with basic respect and kindness, you don't belong in hospitality. Finally, exceptional service will be rewarded significantly. Bonuses, promotions, public recognition. I want you all to understand that kindness isn't weakness or extra effort. It's the core requirement of this job." Daniel paused, letting his words sink in. "I started Heart & Co. with nothing except a belief that restaurants could be more than places to eat. They could be spaces where people felt valued and welcomed, where a good meal with good service could be the highlight of someone's week. where hospitality wasn't just a transaction but a calling. I lost sight of that as the business grew. I delegated too much and paid attention too little. I trusted that my managers were upholding standards without verifying. I let profit margins matter more than people. That's on me, and I take full responsibility. But it changes now. We're going back to the original vision that made Hart & Co. successful, and we're going to do it together, or not at all. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many staff members as possible. You have until Monday to decide if you're committed to this. If you are, I expect to see changed behavior immediately. If you're not, please turn in your resignation to Amanda. No hard feelings. This just isn't the right fit. Ella, please stay after. We have details to discuss about your new role. Everyone else, you're dismissed. Report to Amanda for updated training schedules starting next week. As staff filed out, Daniel could hear whispers. Some excited, some resentful, some confused. Change always created discomfort, but it was necessary. When the room cleared, Ella remained standing where she was, looking shell-shocked. Daniel approached her gently, gesturing for her to sit. She sank into the nearest chair like her legs couldn't support her anymore. Ella, breathe. You look like you're about to pass out. I don't understand any of this, she whispered. I'm just a server. I was doing my job. I don't have management experience. There are people who've worked here for years who should be promoted before me. Why me? Daniel pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Because you have something that can't be taught, Ella. Character, genuine compassion for people, the ability to see every customer as a human being deserving of kindness rather than as a transaction or interruption. Technical skills can be taught. Menu knowledge, table management, scheduling, inventory, all of that can be learned. But genuine kindness? That comes from who you are as a person, and you are exactly what this company needs. But I'm still in college, Ella protested. I'm finishing my business management degree. I only work here part-time. I don't know if I can handle floor manager responsibilities on top of my classes. Your new schedule will be flexible around your class schedule, Daniel assured her. Education matters. I want you to finish your degree. Margaret Chen, our head of HR, will work with you to create a schedule that allows for both work and school. He pulled out a folder he'd prepared. This is your employment contract. Floor manager position. Salary is $75,000 annually, which is triple what you were making as a server. Full benefits including health insurance, dental, and vision. 4 weeks paid vacation. Flexible scheduling to accommodate your degree completion. Your responsibilities will include training staff on service standards, conducting service observations, ensuring customer satisfaction, and working with Amanda and me to rebuild the culture here. You'll also have a mentor, Margaret Chen, who I mentioned. She's been with me since the beginning and embodies everything Hart & Co. should be. She'll help you navigate the transition from server to management. Ella stared at the contract like it was written in a foreign language. This is insane. This doesn't happen in real life. People don't go from server to manager overnight because they brought someone soup. You didn't just bring me soup, Daniel corrected gently. You demonstrated consistent, genuine kindness to every single person you served that night. You did it without knowing I was watching. You did it without expecting reward or recognition. You did it because it's who you are. That matters more than years of experience or technical qualifications. I can teach someone how to manage a floor. I can't teach them how to care about people. You already know how to do that. Ella was quiet for a long moment, staring at the contract. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. My grandmother would have loved this. She's the one who taught me that everyone deserves kindness. She worked as a housekeeper her whole life, cleaning houses for wealthy families. And she always said that how you treat people, when you don't have to be kind, reveals your true character. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Daniel said. She was. She raised me after my parents died when I was 10. She worked herself to exhaustion to make sure I could go to college, that I'd have opportunities she never had. She passed away last year, right before I started working here. Ella wiped at her tears. She used to say that hospitality was holy work, that serving people food and making them feel welcome was an act of love. I thought that was just her way of making her job sound more important than it was. But working here, I realized she was right. There's something sacred about making people feel valued through simple acts of kindness. Your grandmother understood what I'm trying to rebuild here, Daniel said. That philosophy of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their status or how much they can benefit you. That's what Hart & Co. was supposed to be from the beginning. He gestured to the contract. So what do you say? Will you help me bring that philosophy back to this company? Will you teach others what your grandmother taught you? Ella looked at the contract for another long moment. Then she picked up the pen Daniel offered and signed. Yes, I'll do it. For my grandmother, for the customers who deserve better, and for myself, because I think this is work that actually matters. Daniel smiled, feeling hope for the first time in months. Welcome to management, Ella. I think you're going to change everything. 6 months after that transformative Sunday meeting, Hart & Co. looked completely different from the inside out. The physical space remained the same: elegant, exposed brick, warm lighting, carefully chosen furniture. But the atmosphere had shifted in ways that couldn't be measured by decor alone. Ella stood near the hostess stand on a busy Friday evening, clipboard in hand, observing her staff with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned management through dedication rather than just time. She wore professional attire, now tailored black pants and a crisp white blouse, but she'd kept the same warmth and approachability that had characterized her as a server. Staff respected her not because of her title, but because she'd earned it through consistent demonstration of the values she expected from others. Table 6 needs water refills, she said quietly to Marcus, who'd transformed from the eye-rolling server Daniel had encountered into someone genuinely trying to improve. And I noticed table 12 has been waiting about 8 minutes for their appetizer. Can you check with the kitchen on timing? On it, Marcus said, already moving. His attitude had shifted dramatically over the past months. Faced with the choice between adapting to the new culture or leaving, he'd chosen to stay and genuinely try. Ella had worked with him extensively, and while he'd never been naturally warm like she was, he'd learned to be professional and attentive. The transformation hadn't been easy or universal. In the first month after Daniel's undercover visit, 7 staff members had quit or been terminated. Brittany, the hostess, had left voluntarily, unable or unwilling to adjust her attitude. 2 other servers had been fired after repeatedly failing to meet the new service standards. Several kitchen staff had departed, complaining that the increased focus on hospitality was soft and not what they'd signed up for. But the staff who remained or were newly hired had created something special. The kind of workplace culture Daniel had envisioned 8 years ago, but hadn't been able to maintain as the business grew. Margaret Chen had overseen Ella's training personally, spending hours teaching her not just the mechanics of management, but the philosophy behind creating service-focused cultures. Ella had taken to it naturally, her grandmother's lessons about kindness providing a foundation that technical training could build upon. If you've ever felt like kindness was weakness in a professional setting, if you've ever wondered if treating people well actually matters in business, this story proves it does. Share this in the comments, and let's celebrate workplaces that value humanity alongside profit. Daniel walked into Hart & Co. that Friday evening, this time in his usual tailored suit rather than disguised. He'd made it a practice to visit each location monthly, always announced now that the culture shift was underway. He wanted staff to associate his presence with support and recognition rather than fear and punishment. He spotted Ella immediately and smiled at how naturally she'd grown into her role. "Mr. Hart," she greeted him warmly, though they'd agreed months ago that she could call him Daniel when it was just the two of them. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "Surprise inspection," he said with a slight smile. "How are things?" "Really good, actually. We had a party of 10 earlier that was particularly challenging. One guest had severe food allergies, another was celebrating a birthday, and 2 were arguing about something personal. But the team handled it beautifully. Emily anticipated the allergy needs and worked with the chef to create a safe menu. Carlos brought out a special dessert for the birthday guest with candles and had us all sing. And Sophie managed to de-escalate the arguing couple with humor and gentle distraction." "Well," pride shone in Ella's voice as she described her team's actions. That was another thing Daniel loved about her management style. She celebrated her staff's successes rather than taking credit for them. "That's excellent. Sounds like your training is paying off." "It's paying off because they actually want to be here now," Ella said. "That's what's changed most, I think. Staff used to show up for a paycheck and count the minutes until they could leave. Now they show up because they enjoy the work. They like making people happy. They're proud of where they work." Daniel nodded, seeing the truth of her words reflected in the dining room. Servers moved with purpose, but not rush, interacting with guests in ways that felt genuine rather than scripted. The hostess, a new hire named Sandra, who Ella had trained personally, greeted every arrival with a smile that reached her eyes. Even the bussers worked with attention to detail, ensuring tables were spotless and set perfectly. "Walk me through your evening," Daniel said. "I want to understand your process." For the next hour, Ella showed him how she managed a busy service, how she anticipated bottlenecks before they occurred, how she coached staff in real time without making them feel criticized, how she handled a customer complaint about slightly undercooked chicken with apology, immediate correction, and a complimentary dessert that turned a negative experience into a positive one. "The customer who complained about the chicken just asked for me specifically," Ella said after resolving the situation. "She wanted to thank me for handling it so well. She said most restaurants make you feel bad for complaining, but we made her feel heard and valued." "That's perfect hospitality," Daniel said. "You turned a kitchen mistake into an opportunity to demonstrate that we care about our guests' experiences." They sat at the bar, Daniel ordering a coffee, while Ella took a rare break from the floor. Around them, the restaurant hummed with the sound of happy diners, conversation and laughter, and the clink of silverware on plates. It sounded like success, not just financially, but culturally. "Can I tell you something?" Ella said, stirring sugar into her own coffee. "6 months ago, I was terrified. I thought there was no way I could do this job. I didn't have the experience or the education or the confidence. I almost turned down the promotion because I was so sure I'd fail." "What changed?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "I realized that managing people is just an extension of serving them," Ella said. "My staff are my customers in a way. They need support, guidance, resources, and appreciation, just like diners need good food and kind service. Once I understood that, it clicked. I just had to apply the same principles my grandmother taught me about treating people well. That's wisdom most managers take years to learn," Daniel said. "You figured it out in weeks." "I had good teachers," Ella said, gesturing to include Daniel in that assessment. "And I had motivation. Every time I wanted to give up or thought I couldn't handle something, I'd remember that night you came in. How you could have walked out when Marcus ignored you. How you could have fired everyone and started over. But instead, you gave people a chance to change. You invested in the possibility that we could become better. That meant something." Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking about that night 6 months ago. "You know what I remember most about that evening? It wasn't the bad service, though that was certainly memorable. It was you bringing me soup and saying everyone deserves kindness. That simple statement reminded me why I started this business. For people. To create experiences that mattered. I'd lost sight of that in pursuit of expansion and profit." "Did it work?" Ella asked. "The transformation across all locations?" Daniel smiled. "Sales are up 18% across all 12 restaurants. But more importantly, customer satisfaction scores have increased by 42%. Staff retention has improved dramatically. We used to have about 60% annual turnover, and now it's down to 20%. And we're getting applications from people who specifically want to work for Hart & Co. because of our reputation for valuing employees and customers." He pulled out his phone and showed Ella recent reviews for the various locations. 5-star ratings praising not just the food but the service, the atmosphere, the feeling of being welcomed and valued. Comments about servers who remembered regular customers' names and preferences. Stories about staff going above and beyond to make special occasions memorable. "This one's my favorite," Daniel said, pointing to a review for their flagship downtown location. The reviewer talks about bringing their elderly mother who has dementia. She got confused during dinner, forgot where she was, started getting agitated. And instead of making them feel like they should leave, the server, I think it was Maria, sat down with the mother and talked to her gently, reoriented her, made her feel safe. The reviewer said it was the first time in months she'd been able to take her mother out to dinner without it becoming a crisis. Ella read the review, tears in her eyes. That's what it's about, isn't it? Not just serving food, but serving humanity, seeing people in their struggles and responding with compassion. Exactly, Daniel said, and that's what we've built here. A place where kindness isn't just encouraged, it's expected and celebrated. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Ella's staff work. Daniel noticed small things that demonstrated the culture shift. How Emily checked on a table where guests appeared to be having a serious conversation but didn't interrupt, just quietly refilled water and left. How Carlos noticed a child dropping crayons and stopped to help pick them up, making a game of it. How Sophie anticipated an elderly diner's need for reading glasses by bringing a magnifying menu card without being asked. "I want to talk to you about something," Daniel said. "A new opportunity." Ella looked at him curiously. "What kind of opportunity?" "So, we're opening restaurant 13 in 6 months. Bigger location, more upscale than our current establishments. I want it to be our flagship, the model that demonstrates everything Hart & Co. represents. And I want you to be the general manager." Ella's eyes widened. "General manager? Daniel, I've only been a floor manager for 6 months. That's a huge jump." "You're ready," Daniel said confidently. "You've transformed this location from our worst-performing restaurant to our best. Customer satisfaction here is 10 points higher than any other location. Staff morale is through the roof. You've done exactly what I needed you to do. You've proven that culture transformation is possible and sustainable. Now I want you to build that culture from the ground up in a new location." "I don't know," Ella said hesitantly. "That's a lot of responsibility. What if I fail?" "Then we learn from it and try again," Daniel said simply. "But Ella, I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to build something extraordinary, and you'll have support. Margaret will continue mentoring you. I'll be involved in the planning and setup, and you can hire staff who already embrace these values rather than having to reform people who've developed bad habits." Ella was quiet, processing the offer. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take as long as you need. The position doesn't officially exist for another 2 months, but I wanted you to know I think you're the right person for this." "Why?" "Thank you," Ella said, "for believing in me, for giving me chances I never expected, for seeing potential I didn't see in myself." "Thank you for reminding me what actually matters," Daniel replied, "for being exactly who you are and never compromising those values, even when it would have been easier to do so." As the evening service wound down and the last customers lingered over coffee and dessert, Daniel observed Ella doing her closing duties. She personally thanked each staff member for their work that night, offering specific praise for things she'd noticed. She helped bus tables even though it wasn't her job, modeling the idea that no task was beneath anyone. She stayed late to help Sandra, the hostess, figure out a scheduling issue for next week, patiently working through the puzzle of covering shifts when 2 people had requested the same day off. This was what leadership looked like, Daniel thought. Not barking orders or maintaining distance or ruling through fear, but leading by example, serving your staff the way you wanted them to serve customers, creating culture through consistent demonstration of values rather than just talking about them. 2 weeks later, Ella accepted the general manager position. Her transition was scheduled for 3 months out, giving Daniel time to find and train her replacement as floor manager at the current location. He ended up promoting Sandra, who'd been absorbing Ella's teachings and demonstrating the same natural warmth and genuine care for people. The new restaurant, Hart & Co. Reserve, opened 6 months later to tremendous fanfare. It was everything Daniel had envisioned: elegant without being pretentious, upscale without being intimidating, a space where people felt celebrated rather than judged. Ella had hired her entire staff personally, choosing people not just for their technical skills but for their character. She'd developed training programs that emphasized storytelling about food, genuine connection with guests, and treating every person who walked through the door like they mattered. The opening night was flawless. Critics attended. Industry insiders came to see if the buzz was justified, and regular customers who'd followed Hart & Co. for years wanted to experience the new flagship. Ella moved through the dining room with grace and confidence, greeting guests, ensuring everything ran smoothly, supporting her staff with gentle guidance. Daniel attended the opening, proud of what Ella had created but content to stay in the background. This was her moment, her achievement. At the end of the night, after the last guest had left and the staff were cleaning up, Ella found Daniel sitting at the bar. "We did it," she said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Perfect opening night. Not a single major issue. The team was incredible." "You were incredible," Daniel corrected. "This whole restaurant is a reflection of your vision and leadership. It's a reflection of the philosophy you built. Hart & Co. on originally," Ella said. "I just remembered it when everyone else had forgotten. Everyone deserves kindness. That's what we created here tonight. A space where every person who walked through that door felt valued and welcomed." "Oh," Daniel raised his glass of wine in a toast. "To kindness, to hospitality, to building something that matters." Ella clinked her glass against his. "To second chances, to believing in people, to transforming one act of kindness into an entire culture." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, exhausted but satisfied. Around them, the staff laughed and talked as they completed closing duties, their camaraderie obvious. This was a team that actually liked each other, that enjoyed working together, that took pride in what they'd created. "Can I tell you what my grandmother would say if she could see all this?" Ella asked. Daniel smiled. "What would she say?" "She'd say that kindness always comes back to you, multiplied. That when you treat people well, without expecting anything in return, it creates ripples you can't even imagine. You walked into your own restaurant disguised as a nobody, and I treated you with basic human decency. That kindness rippled out to transform an entire company, 12 restaurants, hundreds of staff members, thousands of customers, all because one person chose kindness when they didn't have to." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your grandmother was right, and she'd be so proud of you, Ella, not just for your professional success, but for who you've become. A leader who hasn't forgotten where she came from, or what matters most." 1 year after that fateful Friday night, Hart & Co. was featured in a national business magazine. The article, titled "How Kindness Became a Competitive Advantage," profiled Daniel's undercover experience and the transformation it sparked. It detailed the culture shift, the business results, and Ella's unlikely rise from server to general manager of the company's flagship location. The article included interviews with staff across all locations, customers who'd witnessed the transformation, and industry experts discussing whether kindness-based business models were sustainable. The consensus was clear. Treating people well, both employees and customers, wasn't just morally right, it was excellent business. Hart & Co. had become case study in how culture drives success. But Daniel's favorite part of the article was a photo near the end. It showed Ella standing in Hart & Co. Reserve, surrounded by her staff, everyone smiling genuinely. The caption read, "General Manager Ella Martinez credits her grandmother and Hart & Co. owner Daniel Hart with teaching her that everyone deserves kindness, a philosophy that transformed a restaurant chain." 3 years after Daniel walked into his own restaurant in disguise, Hart & Co. had grown to 18 locations across 5 cities. Each one was managed by someone Ella had trained or influenced, carrying forward the philosophy that had saved the company. Daniel had stepped back from day-to-day operations, trusting his team to maintain the culture they'd built together. Ella was now VP of Operations, overseeing all locations and training all new managers. She'd finished her business degree while managing Hart & Co. Reserve, and had become a sought-after speaker on hospitality and leadership. But she'd never forgotten where it started, with a simple act of bringing soup to a customer who looked like he needed kindness. On the 3-year anniversary of that night, Daniel took Ella to dinner, not at a Hart & Co. location, but at a small family diner in the neighborhood where he'd started his career decades ago. The place was simple and unpretentious, with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. "Why here?" Ella asked, looking around at the modest surroundings. "Because this is where I learned what hospitality means," Daniel explained. "Mr. Chen, the owner, taught me that how you treat people matters more than how fancy your restaurant is or how expensive your food costs. He taught me that everyone deserves kindness, just like your grandmother taught you." They ordered simple food, burgers and fries and milkshakes, and talked about the journey they'd been on together. The transformation of Heart & Co. The lives changed, both customers and staff. The culture they'd built that proved kindness wasn't weakness but strength. "Do you ever think about that Friday night?" Ella asked. "About how different things could have been if you hadn't come in disguised, or if I'd had a different section and someone else served you?" "I think about it often," Daniel admitted. "How one moment, one decision, one act of kindness changed everything. If you hadn't approached my table, if you hadn't treated me with warmth and care, I probably would have fired half the staff and hired replacements. The problems would have continued because I'd have been treating symptoms rather than disease. But you showed me what was possible. You showed me that the culture I'd built originally was still alive, just dormant, that it could be revived and spread. And if you hadn't left that ridiculous tip and promoted me, I'd still be a server working my way through college, never realizing I had leadership potential," Ella added. "You changed my life, Daniel. Not just by giving me a job, but by believing I could be more than I thought I was." "We changed each other," Daniel said. "You reminded me what mattered. I gave you an opportunity to prove yourself. That's what the best relationships do, challenge us to become better versions of ourselves." As they finished their meal, the diner's owner, an elderly Korean man, came over to their table. "Daniel Hart, I haven't seen you in years. How's the restaurant business?" "It's good, Mr. Kim," Daniel said, standing to embrace the older man. "Really good. I want you to meet someone. This is Ella Martinez, my VP of Operations." "Ella, this is Mr. Kim. He owned the diner where I worked as a teenager, where I learned everything that mattered about hospitality." Mr. Kim shook Ella's hand warmly. "Daniel was my best server, not because he was fastest or most experienced, but because he cared about people, treated every customer like they mattered. He learned from the best," Ella said, smiling at both men. "And he's teaching the next generation now, paying forward what you taught him." Mr. Kim nodded approvingly. "That's how it should be. We don't own knowledge or wisdom. We're just caretakers, passing it along to people who will carry it forward. Sounds like you both understand that." After they left the diner, Daniel and Ella stood outside in the cool evening air. The simple diner, the conversation with Mr. Kim, the reminder of where it all started. It put everything in perspective. "I want you to promise me something," Daniel said. "What?" "Promise me you'll never forget this. The feeling of starting with nothing, of being judged by your appearance or job title, of feeling invisible until someone chose to see you. Promise me that as you continue to rise in this company, as you become more successful and influential, you'll remember what it felt like to be a server bringing soup to a stranger." "I promise," Ella said solemnly. "How could I forget? That night changed everything. And Daniel, I want you to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll keep doing this. Not just building a successful company, but building something that matters. Creating spaces where kindness is valued, giving people chances they don't think they deserve. Remembering that behind every employee and every customer is a human being with struggles and dreams and a desire to be treated with dignity." "I promise," Daniel said. "That's what this has always been about. Not profit or prestige or expanding an empire, but creating something that makes the world a little bit kinder, one meal at a time." They stood there for a moment, two people whose lives had intersected at exactly the right time, each giving the other what they needed most. Daniel had given Ella opportunity and belief in her potential. Ella had given Daniel a reminder of his purpose and a path back to the values he'd lost sight of. Years later, when people asked Daniel about the turning point for Heart & Co., about when the company became what it was, he always told the same story, about disguising himself and walking into his own restaurant, about experiencing neglect and dismissal and invisibility, about a server named Ella who brought him soup and said 3 words that changed everything. Everyone deserves kindness. Those 3 words became Heart & Co.'s unofficial motto, printed on training materials and whispered between staff members and embodied in every interaction. They were simple words, but they contained a philosophy powerful enough to transform a struggling company into a thriving enterprise built on human connection rather than just transactions. And it all started because one person chose kindness when they didn't have to. Because Ella treated a stranger in old clothes like he mattered, not knowing he was the owner but knowing he was human, and that was reason enough. In the end, that was the real story. Not a millionaire rescuing a struggling server, though that happened too, but 2 people reminding each other what actually matters in business and in life. Kindness, dignity, treating everyone like they deserve respect and care. Because everyone does deserve kindness, and when we remember that when we live, that we create ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. One act of kindness becomes 2, then 10, then hundreds. One person treating another well inspires others to do the same. One moment of genuine humanity transforms an entire culture. That's what Daniel learned when he disguised himself and walked into his own restaurant. That's what Ella taught him when she brought soup to a stranger. And that's what Heart & Co. became a testament to the radical power of treating people well, of choosing kindness, of remembering that behind every transaction is a human being who deserves to be seen and valued. The millionaire had disguised himself at his own restaurant and froze when the waitress said 3 words. But those words didn't just change that one night. They changed everything that came after. They transformed a company, launched a career, and created a legacy built on the simple truth that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves kindness.